The rain fell in unrelenting sheets across the cemetery, droplets cascading down the polished granite headstones that stood in solemn rows. Among them, a solitary figure moved with determined steps, his Italian leather shoes sinking slightly into the sodden earth. Maxwell Grant, CEO of Grant Technologies, one of America's fastest-growing tech conglomerates, carried a bouquet of white roses, their petals trembling in the downpour. It had been exactly 5 years since Eliza's passing. 5 years since the only woman he had ever truly loved had succumbed to an aggressive form of cancer that had taken her from this world in mere months. The memory of her still haunted him, a persistent ghost that neither his 60-hour work weeks nor his $3.8 billion net worth could exorcise. Maxwell's tailored suit, normally impeccable, was quickly becoming drenched as he made his way to the familiar spot, third row from the cypress tree, where Eliza's headstone stood. He came here only once a year, allowing himself this single day of vulnerability before returning to the ruthless business world he dominated with cold precision. As he approached the grave, Maxwell froze. A small figure was already there, a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, kneeling before Eliza's headstone. The boy wore a blue raincoat, his small hands pressed against the wet stone, as if trying to feel some warmth from it. The CEO stood paralyzed, confusion washing over him. Who was this child? Why was he at Eliza's grave? Before Maxwell could retreat unnoticed, the boy turned around, his eyes widening with recognition, despite the fact that Maxwell was certain they had never met. "Hi, Dad," the boy said simply, his voice small, yet somehow cutting through the sound of the rainfall. "Mom said you'd come eventually." The world seemed to tilt beneath Maxwell's feet. "Dad, this had to be some kind of mistake, a cruel prank." He and Eliza had never had children. They had planned to someday, but her diagnosis had changed everything. "I think you're confused, son," Maxwell managed to say, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "I'm not your father." The boy stood up, raindrops sliding down his face, mixing with what might have been tears. "My name is Oliver. Mom left me letters. She said that when she was gone I should wait for you here today. She said you didn't know about me." Maxwell's heart pounded against his ribcage as he took in the boy's features, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw. They were Eliza's, unmistakably, but there was something else there too, something that made his breath catch in his throat. The boy had his nose, his forehead. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already piqued your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey. Which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below." Maxwell's fingers loosened, and the bouquet of white roses fell to the muddy ground, petals scattering across Eliza's grave. Impossible thoughts raced through his mind. Had Eliza kept this monumental secret from him? A child, his child, that he never knew existed. "How old are you?" Maxwell asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. "8, Oliver replied, clutching a weathered envelope in his small hand. "Mom said I should give you this when you came." The rain continued to fall as Maxwell stared at the envelope in Oliver's outstretched hand. His name was written across it in Eliza's unmistakable handwriting, the elegant curves and precise strokes he would recognize anywhere. With trembling fingers he took it, feeling as though he was handling something both precious and dangerous. "Who's been taking care of you?" Maxwell asked, suddenly concerned about the practical realities of this child's existence. "Aunt Sarah," Oliver replied, referring to Eliza's younger sister, whom Maxwell had only met a handful of times. "She's waiting in the car. She said I should talk to you alone first." Maxwell glanced towards the cemetery entrance, where he could make out the silhouette of a car with its headlights dimmed. A figure sat behind the wheel, watching. He looked back at the boy, at Oliver, and felt an overwhelming surge of emotions, confusion, anger at being kept in the dark, and something else entirely unexpected, a flicker of connection. The child's eyes held the same intelligent gaze that had captivated Maxwell the first time he'd met Eliza at that charity gala, nearly a decade ago. "Let's get out of this rain," Maxwell said, making a split-second decision. He removed his suit jacket and draped it around Oliver's shoulders, the expensive fabric swallowing the boy's small frame. He guided Oliver towards the marble mausoleum nearby, a temporary shelter from the downpour. Inside, the sound of rain drumming against the stone created an otherworldly atmosphere. Maxwell sat on a stone bench, and after a moment's hesitation, Oliver sat beside him, keeping a cautious distance. Maxwell turned the envelope over in his hands, his thumb running across the wax seal. Why had Eliza kept this from him? They had shared everything, or so he had believed. The thought that she had hidden something so monumental made him question every memory they had built together. Mom was sick for a long time, Oliver offered, as if reading Maxwell's thoughts. She said she didn't want to burden you. Burden. The word struck Maxwell like a physical blow. Had she seen their love as so fragile that a child would have been a burden? Or had she seen him as someone who couldn't handle both his corporate responsibilities and fatherhood? With a deep breath, Maxwell broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long, the paper slightly yellow with age. He began to read. "My dearest Maxwell," it began in Eliza's flowing script. "If you're reading this, then you've met our son Oliver." The letter detailed how Eliza had discovered her pregnancy just weeks after Maxwell had secured the pivotal investment that would transform his struggling startup into what would eventually become Ground Technologies. She had watched him work 18-hour days, pouring everything into building his company, and made the decision not to tell him about the pregnancy, fearing it would force him to choose between his dreams and his family. By the time she realized the company was stable enough for her to reveal the truth, the first symptoms of her illness had appeared. Doctors had advised against the stress of major life changes during her treatment. "I wanted to tell you so many times," she wrote. "But first I was protecting your dream, and then I was protecting you from pain. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I was selfish. But I never, not for one moment, stopped loving you." Maxwell's vision blurred as he read the final paragraphs. "Oliver is so much like you. Brilliant, determined, with that same spark in his eyes when he's solving puzzles. He knows all about you. I've made sure of that. He knows his father is a man who changes the world with his ideas, who never backs down from a challenge. All I ask is that you give him a chance to know you too." As Maxwell folded the letter, he became aware that Oliver was watching him intently, those familiar eyes, his eyes, studying his reaction. "Did you love my mom?" Oliver asked suddenly, his voice small but direct. "More than anything in this world," Maxwell answered without hesitation, surprised by the raw honesty in his own voice. For years, he had carefully constructed walls around any mention of Eliza, redirecting conversations, burying himself in work. Yet here, with this child, his child, the truth flowed effortlessly. "She said you would build rocket ships together someday," Oliver continued, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. "She said you'd show me how." The mention of rocket ships hit Maxwell with the force of a physical blow. He and Eliza had indeed dreamed of building model rockets together with their future children. It was a tradition from his own childhood, one of the few happy memories he had of his distant father, moments of connection when they would launch their handmade creations into the clear Texas sky. She remembered that, Maxwell whispered, more to himself than to Oliver. A memory surfaced, Eliza laughing as they lay on the roof deck of his first apartment, planning their future while watching the stars. "We'll build a whole fleet," she had said, "and our kids will think their dad is the smartest man in the universe." Oliver nodded, his small face serious. "I already started. Aunt Sarah helped me get the kits, but I had to read the instructions myself. Mom said you were good at following complicated instructions." A strange warmth began to spread through Maxwell's chest. For 5 years, he had been merely existing, moving through his days with mechanical precision, building his empire with cold determination. Now, sitting beside this child, his son, he felt something stir within him, something he thought had died along with Eliza. "Would you like to see a picture?" Oliver asked, reaching into the pocket of his raincoat and pulling out a small, laminated photograph. "This is me and Mom." Maxwell took the offered photo with careful fingers. It showed a younger, healthier Eliza sitting on a park bench, her arm around a toddler version of Oliver. Both were smiling widely at the camera, their eyes crinkling at the corners in the exact same way. The date stamp on the photo indicated it had been taken about 5 years ago, just months before her death. "She was very pretty," Oliver added, leaning slightly closer to look at the photograph with Maxwell. "Yes, she was," Maxwell agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "The most beautiful person I've ever known." He hesitated before asking, "Do you remember her well?" Oliver's eyes dropped to his hands. "Sometimes I think I do, but Aunt Sarah says I was too little when she died. I remember her voice, though, and her stories." His small fingers traced patterns on the marble bench. "She recorded videos for my birthdays. I get to watch a new one every year." Maxwell's mind raced. What kind of man leaves his child to grow up on birthday videos of a mother who's gone? But the rational part of his brain countered immediately. "You didn't know. You couldn't have been there." "Oliver," Maxwell said, struggling to find the right words, "I wish I had known about you sooner." The boy looked up at him, vulnerability clear in his expression. "Are you mad at Mom for not telling you?" It was a surprisingly perceptive question from someone so young. Was he angry? Part of him wanted to be. Part of him felt betrayed by the one person he had trusted implicitly. But as he looked at Oliver's face, this perfect combination of himself and Eliza, he found he couldn't hold on to that anger. "No," Maxwell said after a thoughtful pause. "I'm not mad at her. She made a choice she thought was right at the time." He carefully returned the photograph to Oliver. "But I am sorry that I missed so much of your lives." A careful hope flickered across Oliver's face. "Does that mean, do you want to know me now?" Before Maxwell could answer, the mausoleum door creaked open, and a woman stepped inside, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. Sarah, Eliza's sister, had apparently decided the private conversation had gone on long enough. "Oliver, honey, it's getting late," she said, her voice gentle but cautious. Then her eyes met Maxwell's, and he saw a complex mixture of emotions there, wariness, relief, and a silent question about what would happen next. Maxwell stood, suddenly acutely aware of how unprepared he was for this moment. His carefully scheduled life, his board meetings and acquisitions, his penthouse apartment designed for a solitary occupant, none of it had room for an 8-year-old boy. And yet, as Oliver looked up at him with Eliza's hopeful eyes, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that everything would have to change. "Sarah," he acknowledged with a nod. "Thank you for bringing him today." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'd like to talk more about arrangements moving forward." Sarah's posture relaxed slightly. "We're staying at the Westbrook Hotel downtown, room 712. She reached for Oliver's hand. "Perhaps you could join us for breakfast tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Maxwell nodded, his CEO instincts taking over as he pulled out his phone to clear his morning schedule. 9 o'clock, he confirmed, already composing a message to his executive assistant to reschedule his strategy meeting with the board. As Sarah turned to leave with Oliver, the boy suddenly broke away and ran back to Maxwell. Without warning, he wrapped his arms around Maxwell's waist in a quick, awkward hug. "Bye, Dad," he said, testing the word cautiously. Maxwell stood frozen for a moment before his hand instinctively came to rest on the boy's head. "I'll see you tomorrow, Oliver," he promised, surprised by how much he meant it. The drive back to his penthouse felt surreal to Maxwell. The sleek interior of his Bentley, normally a cocoon of comfort after long days, now seemed strangely empty despite his driver's presence in the front seat. Rain continued to streak down the tinted windows, blurring the city lights into watercolor smudges as they passed through downtown. "Change of plans for tomorrow, Edward," Maxwell told his driver, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll need you at 8:30 a.m. We're going to the Westbrook Hotel." "Very good, sir," Edward replied with professional detachment, though Maxwell caught the slight curious glance in the rearview mirror. Once alone in his penthouse, Maxwell moved through the familiar space with new eyes. The minimalist design that had once seemed sophisticated now felt sterile. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he had helped reshape with his technology. Yet tonight, the empire of twinkling lights brought him no satisfaction. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and walked to his home office. The walls were adorned with framed magazine covers featuring his face, awards recognizing his business acumen, and patents that had made him billions. Not a single family photo, not one personal memento. Maxwell unlocked his private safe and retrieved a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay the few keepsakes he had of Eliza, a handwritten note from their 3rd date, the vintage watch she had given him when Grant Technologies landed its first major contract, a small velvet box containing the engagement ring he had never had the chance to give her, and underneath it all, a photograph, he and Eliza on a rare vacation, standing on a beach at sunset. Her head was thrown back in laughter as he looked at her with transparent adoration. He traced her face with his finger, understanding now why he had buried these memories so deeply. The pain of losing her had been unbearable. "You should have told me," he whispered to her image. "I would have been there, for both of you." His phone buzzed with notifications, emails requiring immediate attention, decisions only he could make, crises that normally would have consumed his evening. For the first time in 5 years, Maxwell silenced his phone without a second thought. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed Oliver into the search bar. What would an 8-year-old boy need? What did 8-year-old boys even like? Maxwell Grant, who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself completely out of his depth. After an hour of research that left him more overwhelmed than informed, Maxwell did something he rarely resorted to. He called for help. "James," he said when his CFO answered, "your kids are around 10, right?" "Sir?" James sounded confused by the personal nature of the question. "Yes, the twins just turned 9 last month." "I need advice," Maxwell said, the words foreign on his tongue. "About children." The silence on the other end lasted several beats too long. "Sir, is everything all right?" Maxwell took a deep breath. "I found out today that I have a son. He's 8. Another long pause. "Congratulations," James ventured cautiously. "His mother was Eliza. She never told me. She's been gone for 5 years. He's been living with her sister." The facts tumbled out in his typical efficient manner, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his emotion. "Jesus, Max," James said, dropping the formal address they typically maintained. That's a lot to process. I'm meeting him for breakfast tomorrow. I don't know the first thing about being a father." The admission cost him, but Maxwell had always valued directness. "No one does it first," James said, his voice warming. "But listen, if anyone can figure it out quickly, it's you. You mastered quantum computing in what, 3 months? This is different." "It is," James agreed. "It's more important. Stories like this remind us of the power of unexpected second chances. If you believe in the beauty of reconnection, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next in this journey." After they hung up, Maxwell spent hours researching schools in the area, reading about child development, and even browsing online stores for age-appropriate gifts. When exhaustion finally overtook him at 4 a.m., he fell asleep at his desk, his dreams filled with rocket ships soaring into clear blue skies. The morning brought a rare moment of vulnerability as Maxwell stood before his closet, discarding his usual power suit in favor of something less intimidating. He finally settled on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, clothes he typically reserved for rare weekends away from the office. As the Bentley approached the Westbrook Hotel, Maxwell felt his heart race in a way it hadn't since his first major investor pitch. He, who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with his decisions, was nervous about breakfast with an 8-year-old boy. "Wait here, Edward," he instructed his driver before entering the hotel, a small gift bag clutched in his hand. The hotel restaurant was busy with morning patrons, but Maxwell spotted them immediately. Oliver sat beside his aunt at a corner table, his legs swinging above the floor, as he concentrated intensely on coloring something on a paper placemat. Sarah noticed Maxwell first, touching Oliver's shoulder gently to get his attention. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes finding Maxwell across the room. For a moment, neither moved. Then Oliver raised his hand in a small, hesitant wave. Maxwell returned the gesture, feeling strangely self-conscious as he navigated between tables toward them. He was accustomed to people watching him. He was a recognizable figure in business circles, but their gazes had never mattered like the one following him now. "Good morning," Maxwell said, addressing them both, but finding his eyes drawn to Oliver. In the daylight, the resemblance was even more striking. The boy had Maxwell's high forehead and the same cowlick at the crown that had plagued Maxwell in childhood photographs. "You came," Oliver stated, a hint of surprise in his voice that made something twist painfully in Maxwell's chest. "I said I would," Maxwell replied, settling into the chair across from him. He set the gift bag on the table. "I brought you something." Oliver looked at his aunt, who nodded her permission. He reached for the bag with careful fingers, as if afraid it might disappear. Inside was a model rocket kit, the most advanced one Maxwell could find on short notice. "Mom said you liked building these," Oliver said, excitement creeping into his voice as he examined the box. "This one has real launch capability." "I thought we could work on it together," Maxwell suggested, trying to sound casual despite the significance of the offer. "If that's something you'd like." Oliver nodded vigorously, clutching the box to his chest. "I have tools at Aunt Sarah's, special ones for the small parts." The waitress arrived to take their orders, her eyes widening slightly when she recognized Maxwell. He was used to this reaction, but found himself irritated by it today, wanting no distractions from the conversation at hand. As they waited for their food, Sarah cleared her throat. "I've brought some of Oliver's records," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Medical history, school reports, that sort of thing. I thought you might want to review them." Maxwell accepted the folder with a nod of thanks. "How has he been doing in school?" he asked, opening it to find a series of report cards with rows of A's and glowing teacher comments. "He's in the gifted program," Sarah answered with obvious pride. "Top of his class in mathematics and science." "Like father, like son," Maxwell murmured, a strange warmth spreading through him at the thought. He looked up to find Oliver watching him intently. "Mom said you build computers that can think," the boy said. "Is that true?" Maxwell smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "That's a simplified way of putting it, but essentially, yes. My company develops advanced artificial intelligence systems." "Could you show me sometime?" Oliver asked, leaning forward with obvious fascination. "I could," Maxwell agreed, already envisioning a tour of the research labs that would need to be arranged. "Would you like that?" Oliver nodded enthusiastically, then hesitated. "But Aunt Sarah and I live in Boston now. We are just here for—" He trailed off, looking uncertainly at his aunt. "We came for the anniversary," Sarah explained quietly. "We fly back tomorrow afternoon." The information hit Maxwell like a bucket of cold water. He had been making mental plans, adjusting his schedule, considering which room in his penthouse could be converted for a child, all assuming that Oliver was nearby. The reality that the boy lived across the country hadn't occurred to him. "I see," he said, years of business negotiations helping him maintain a neutral expression despite his dismay. "And you're settled there? Oliver's school, your work?" Sarah nodded. "I teach at Westlake Academy, where Oliver attends. We have a nice apartment near the campus. It's been our home for 4 years now." Maxwell processed this information quickly, his mind already analyzing the problem from multiple angles. He could establish an East Coast office, perhaps relocate some operations, or maybe, would it be possible, he began carefully, for Oliver to extend his stay, just for a week or two. "I could arrange for tutors to keep him current with his schoolwork." Sarah looked taken aback. "Mr. Grant, Maxwell, please." "No, Maxwell," she corrected herself. "This is all very sudden. Oliver has only just met you." "I want to stay," Oliver interrupted, his voice small but determined. He turned pleading eyes to his aunt. Please, Aunt Sarah, just for a little while. Sarah hesitated, clearly torn. Oliver, honey, your life is in Boston, your friends, your school. But he's my dad, Oliver said, the simple statement hanging in the air between them. Maxwell watched the internal struggle play out on Sarah's face. He understood her reservations. He was, for all practical purposes, a stranger to them both. Yet the past 24 hours had awakened something in him that couldn't be easily dismissed. What if I came to Boston instead? Maxwell suggested, the decision forming even as he spoke the words. I could take a temporary apartment near you. That way, Oliver maintains his routine and we can get to know each other. Sarah's expression showed surprise, clearly not expecting this level of accommodation from a man whose reputation painted him as ruthlessly dedicated to his business. You would do that? She asked. Leave your company? I have capable people who can manage things in my absence, Maxwell said, though in truth, he had never been away from headquarters for more than a week in the past decade. Some things are more important than business. Oliver's face lit up with hope, his eyes darting between the adults. Does that mean? Maxwell held up a hand, cautioning against premature celebration. It's just a suggestion. Your aunt and I need to discuss what's best for you. Sarah studied him carefully. This isn't a game, Mr. Grant. This is a child's life, a child who's already experienced significant loss. I understand that, Maxwell replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I have no intention of disrupting Oliver's life only to disappear again, but I've missed 8 years already. I don't want to miss any more. Their food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Maxwell noticed the careful way Oliver cut his pancakes, the methodical precision reminiscent of his own habits. Nature or nurture? He found himself wondering what other traits they might share. Perhaps, Sarah finally said, breaking the tense silence, we could start with weekend visits. Oliver and I could fly out once a month, or you could come to Boston. We could see how it goes. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. But Maxwell recognized it as the opening offer in a negotiation where he held few cards. That seems reasonable for a start, he conceded, already planning to have his legal team draft visitation agreements that would gradually increase his time with Oliver. And in the meantime, he added, turning to Oliver, we could video chat. I could help with your homework, or we could work on virtual rocket designs together. Oliver brightened at the suggestion. I have a science fair coming up. We're supposed to create something with practical applications for environmental conservation. Maxwell smiled. That happens to be an area where my company has done considerable research. I think we could come up with something impressive. As breakfast continued, the conversation flowed more naturally. Oliver, growing more comfortable, peppered Maxwell with questions about his work, his life, his favorite books and movies. Maxwell answered each one honestly, finding an unexpected pleasure in sharing parts of himself he typically kept private. For the first time in years, Maxwell Grant found himself fully present in the moment, his ever-active mind not racing ahead to the next meeting or acquisition target. Instead, he was completely focused on memorizing the sound of his son's laughs, the enthusiastic way he talked with his hands, the curious intelligence behind his eyes. By the time they said goodbye with plans to meet again the following morning before Oliver and Sarah's flight, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that his life had irreversibly changed. The empire he had built, which had been his sole focus for so long, now seemed like merely a footnote to what truly mattered. As he walked back to his waiting car, Maxwell pulled out his phone and called his executive assistant. Claire, I need you to clear my schedule for the next month, he instructed, and find me a suitable property to lease in Boston, something family-friendly near Westlake Academy. Sir? Claire's confusion was evident even through the phone. What about the merger negotiations? They can wait, Maxwell said, looking back at the hotel where his son was staying. Something more important has come up. The corporate headquarters of Grant Technologies occupied 20 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown, its logo, a stylized G inside an infinity symbol, illuminated against the city skyline. The building had always been Maxwell's second home, a monument to his ambition and ingenuity. Today, however, as he strode through the executive floor toward the boardroom, it felt different. Less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully designed cage. "They're all waiting, sir," his executive assistant Claire informed him, matching his brisk pace. "The legal team has prepared the documents as requested, but Mr. Harrington is quite concerned about the timing of your sabbatical." Maxwell nodded, barely acknowledging her words as he mentally rehearsed what he would say to his board of directors. These were shrewd individuals who had invested millions in his vision and in his leadership. None of them would be pleased about his sudden plans to work remotely from Boston for the foreseeable future. "The numbers from R&D came in this morning," Claire continued, handing him a tablet. "The quantum encryption protocol exceeded expectations in the latest trials. Dr. Chen says they're ready to move to phase-3 testing." This would normally have captured Maxwell's full attention. The encryption technology represented potentially billions in defense contracts alone. Today, however, his mind kept returning to Oliver's face, to the boy's excitement over the model rocket kit, to the promise Maxwell had made to be present for the science fair in 3 weeks' time. The boardroom fell silent as Maxwell entered. 8 faces turned toward him, expressions ranging from curious to concerned. James, his CFO, offered a subtle nod of support. "Thank you all for accommodating this last-minute meeting," Maxwell began, remaining standing at the head of the table. "I'll be direct. I recently received news that has necessitated some significant personal adjustments. I have a son, an 8-year-old boy, whose existence I was unaware of until yesterday." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone's pen dropping onto the polished table. "His mother was Eliza Bennett," Maxwell continued, finding it easier to maintain his composure by sticking to facts. "Some of you knew her. She passed away 5 years ago from cancer. My son has been living with his maternal aunt in Boston, and I intend to establish a presence in his life immediately." Maxwell, Victor Harrington, his longest-serving board member, leaned forward. "While we all certainly appreciate the personal significance of this discovery, the timing is problematic. The DoD contract negotiations are entering a critical phase, and the Rivera acquisition will proceed as planned," Maxwell interrupted smoothly. "I'm not stepping down, Victor. I'm simply relocating temporarily and adjusting my work arrangements. Modern technology makes physical location largely irrelevant." "With all due respect," Christine Weber, head of investor relations, interjected, "your hands-on leadership style has been a cornerstone of investor confidence. News of your sudden family leave could impact stock prices significantly." "Then we don't make it news," Maxwell countered. "We frame it as an expansion. Grant Technologies has been considering an East Coast research hub for years. We'll accelerate those plans. I'll maintain a full schedule of virtual meetings and fly back for critical in-person negotiations." As the discussion continued, growing increasingly heated at times, Maxwell found himself oddly detached from the outcome. 6 months ago, even 24 hours ago, the prospect of disappointing his board or potentially destabilizing his company's market position would have been unthinkable. Now, as executives debated how his personal decisions might impact quarterly projections, Maxwell could only think about the fact that his son had never had a father present at a school function. "I believe what Maxwell is proposing is entirely feasible," James finally spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the debate. "We've been discussing succession planning and decentralized leadership for years. This situation simply accelerates that timeline. If anything, it makes our organization more resilient. Maxwell shot him a grateful look before addressing the room again. I prepared a detailed transition plan, he said, gesturing to Claire, who began distributing tablets with the document. It outlines temporary reporting structures, decision-making protocols, and a communication schedule. I'm not disappearing, I'm simply reprioritizing. After another 40 minutes of discussion, contingency planning, and what felt to Maxwell like excessive reassurance, the board reluctantly accepted his plan. As the executives filed out, James lingered behind. That went better than expected, he commented once they were alone. Maxwell sank into his chair. They didn't have much choice. My voting shares ensure that. True, James acknowledged, but their cooperation will make things easier. He paused. How's the boy taking all this? Oliver, Maxwell specified, finding it suddenly important that his son be recognized as a person with a name, not just the boy. He's resilient, curious, smarter than I was at his age. James smiled. High praise indeed. When do you leave for Boston? Tomorrow morning. I've leased a furnished property near his school. Sarah, his aunt, agreed to let him stay with me this weekend while she returns to finalize some work arrangements. If all goes well, we'll establish a more permanent custody schedule. Moving quickly as usual, James observed, but this time it's for the right reasons. After James left, Maxwell moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, gazing out at the city below. For years, he had viewed the urban landscape as a chessboard. Buildings representing corporate territories, streets flowing with opportunities and threats. Today, he found himself wondering which parks had the best play areas, which neighborhoods were safest for children, which schools might nurture a young mind fascinated by science and technology. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It contained a photo of Oliver holding up a drawing of what appeared to be a rocket design, complete with labeled parts and mathematical calculations in childish handwriting. The text message from Sarah read, "He's been working on this all afternoon, says he wants to show you when we meet for dinner." Something tightened in Maxwell's chest as he saved the image, making it the first personal photo in his otherwise utilitarian device. He typed a reply. "Tell him it's impressive. I'm looking forward to discussing the thrust calculations." After sending the message, Maxwell opened his private server and began a search for a very specific kind of information: birth certificate records, medical histories, school registrations, the digital trail of Oliver's existence. As the data accumulated on his screen, a disturbing pattern emerged. There were gaps, inconsistencies, records that didn't quite align with the timeline Sarah had presented. Maxwell frowned, his investigative instincts triggered. Something about Oliver's history didn't add up. The birth certificate had been filed later than standard procedure would dictate. The earliest medical records appeared when Oliver was nearly 2 years old, with no documentation of prior pediatric care. Had Eliza been hiding their son for reasons beyond what her letter had claimed? Was there something Sarah wasn't telling him? Maxwell created a secure folder and downloaded all the information he'd gathered. This would require careful investigation, but he would need to proceed delicately. He didn't want to disrupt the fragile connection he was building with Oliver by confronting Sarah with accusations before he had all the facts. As he closed down his computer and prepared to leave the office earlier than he had in years, Maxwell felt the weight of multiple responsibilities settling on his shoulders. He had always excelled at solving complex problems, at navigating treacherous business landscapes. Now he faced his greatest challenge, being both the CEO his company needed and the father his son deserved, while unraveling a mystery that might change everything he thought he knew about Eliza's final years. One thing was certain: Maxwell Grant would approach this challenge as he had every other in his life, with unwavering determination and all the resources at his disposal. But this time, the stakes felt infinitely higher. This wasn't about market share or technological innovation. This was about his son, his flesh and blood, and nothing would stop him from uncovering the truth and protecting what was his. The Boston townhouse Maxwell had leased was nothing like his sleek, minimalist penthouse. Located in a tree-lined neighborhood near Westlake Academy, it featured warm wooden floors, built-in bookshelves, and a backyard, something Maxwell hadn't had since childhood. The real estate agent had assured him it was family-friendly, a term he'd never considered relevant to his housing needs before. On this crisp Saturday morning, Maxwell stood in what would be Oliver's room, directing the delivery team as they assembled the furniture he'd ordered: a bed with a space-themed comforter, a desk positioned to catch the morning light, bookshelves already filled with age-appropriate science books, model kits, and the latest educational technology. The walls remained white. Maxwell had decided that Oliver should choose the color himself. "The rocket simulator goes there," Maxwell indicated, pointing to the corner where the high-tech device would be installed. It was an advanced piece of equipment, typically used in university engineering programs, but Maxwell had pulled strings to acquire a modified version suitable for a gifted 8-year-old. His phone rang, James calling with updates from headquarters. Maxwell stepped into the hallway to take it. The DoD representatives were satisfied with the virtual meeting, James reported. "They've agreed to postpone on-site demonstrations until your return next month, and the legal team has drafted the custody documentation as requested, though they recommend consulting with a family law specialist in Massachusetts." "Already scheduled for Monday," Maxwell replied, glancing at his watch. Oliver and Sarah would arrive in less than an hour for the weekend stay. "What about the investigation?" There was a brief pause. "The private investigator you hired is thorough. Initial findings confirm your suspicions about the timeline discrepancies. He's requesting access to more of Ms. Bennett's personal records to fill in the gaps." "Tell him whatever he needs," Maxwell said, lowering his voice as a delivery person walked past with a box of science equipment. "But stress the importance of discretion. No one approaches Sarah or anyone connected to Oliver directly. I'll handle that aspect personally when the time is right." After ending the call, Maxwell made a final inspection of the house. Everything was perfect, or as perfect as he could make it, for a child he was still getting to know. The kitchen was stocked with foods that, according to his research, appealed to most 8-year-olds, along with the healthier options Sarah had mentioned Oliver preferred. The backyard now featured a small observatory dome, hastily constructed but fully functional, housing a telescope that could track the International Space Station. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. Maxwell took a deep breath, smoothed his casual sweater, another departure from his usual attire, and opened the door. Oliver stood on the porch, clutching a small suitcase, his eyes wide as he took in the imposing townhouse. Sarah stood behind him with a larger bag, her expression a mixture of caution and resignation. "Welcome," Maxwell said, stepping aside to let them enter. "I hope you had a good flight." "It was awesome," Oliver enthused, his initial shyness giving way to excitement. "We flew right through a cloud formation that the pilot said was unusual for this time of year. I took pictures." He patted the pocket where Maxwell assumed a phone or camera resided. "I'd like to see those," Maxwell said sincerely, helping Sarah with the larger bag. "Perhaps you can show me after I give you the tour?" Oliver nodded eagerly, already looking around the entrance hall with curious eyes. "This is very generous of you," Sarah said quietly, as Oliver moved ahead to examine a framed schematic of an early Grant Technologies prototype displayed on the wall. "The private flights, this house, it's a lot." "It's nothing," Maxwell replied honestly. To someone who measured his wealth in billions, these arrangements were indeed minimal. I want him to be comfortable, to feel at home. Sarah's expression softened slightly. He hasn't stopped talking about you since we left. I've never seen him this excited. A warm feeling spread through Maxwell's chest at her words, but before he could respond, Oliver called from further inside the house. "Dad, is this my room?" "Dad." The word still sent a jolt through Maxwell each time Oliver used it. He excused himself from Sarah and found Oliver standing in the doorway of the bedroom, his mouth open in astonishment as he took in the space that had been designed specifically for him. "Do you like it?" Maxwell asked, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps he had overstepped, making too many assumptions about what Oliver would want. "This is all for me?" Oliver asked, stepping tentatively into the room. His fingers brushed across the spines of the books, lingered on the sleek tablet on the desk, then came to rest on the model rocket displayed on a shelf. "Is that a replica of the Saturn V?" Maxwell confirmed. 1/64th scale, but with incredible detail. The boosters separate just like the original. Oliver looked up at him with an expression of such pure joy that Maxwell felt something inside him shift and rearrange, making space for this new, unfamiliar emotion. "Thank you," Oliver said simply, his voice sincere in a way only children's can be. After showing Oliver the rest of the house, including the backyard observatory that elicited another round of awestruck appreciation, Maxwell supervised as Oliver unpacked his things. Sarah, after a thorough inspection of the arrangements and a private conversation with Maxwell about emergency contacts, dietary restrictions, and bedtime routines, prepared to leave. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she told Oliver, kneeling to his level. "You have my number, and I'm just a 20-minute drive away at Aunt Paula's if you need anything." Oliver nodded, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable, as the reality of staying with his newly discovered father for the weekend settled in. "I'll be good," he promised. "I know you will, sweetheart," Sarah said, kissing his forehead before standing to address Maxwell. "He takes his allergy medication with dinner. The inhaler is in the side pocket of his bag, just in case, though he hasn't had an asthma attack in over a year." "Understood," Maxwell said, mentally filing away this critical information. "We'll call you if anything comes up, but I'm sure we'll be fine." He placed a reassuring hand on Oliver's shoulder, surprised when the boy leaned slightly into his touch. After Sarah left, a moment of awkward silence fell between them. "Are you hungry?" Maxwell asked, remembering from his research that growing children needed regular meals. Oliver nodded. "A little. Aunt Sarah made me eat breakfast before our flight, but that was hours ago. I thought we might try that pizza place we passed on the way from the airport," Maxwell suggested. "The reviews online said it was the best in the neighborhood." Oliver's face lit up. "I love pizza. Mom used to say—" He stopped abruptly, his expression clouding. "What did your mom used to say?" Maxwell prompted gently, sensing the importance of not shying away from mentions of Eliza. "She said that the best ideas come over pizza," Oliver finished quietly. "We used to have pizza Fridays, and she'd ask me what I learned that week, and then we'd talk about how to turn it into something cool." Maxwell swallowed the lump forming in his throat. "That sounds like her," he said, memories washing over him. "She and I used to order pizza when we were working on new prototypes. Sometimes we'd stay up all night designing and redesigning until we got it right." Oliver looked up at him, hungry for these connections between his parents. "Really? Mom said you were really smart and could fix anything that was broken." "She exaggerated," Maxwell said with a small smile. "But we did make a good team." He hesitated, then added carefully, "If you'd like, we could make Pizza Fridays our tradition too, a way to honor her." Oliver nodded vigorously, then glanced toward the kitchen. "Could we make it instead of buying it? Mom taught me how to roll the dough." Maxwell, who couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked anything more complicated than coffee, felt a moment of panic. "I don't have much experience with that," he admitted, "but I'm a quick learner. If you'll show me, we can try it together." And that was how Maxwell Grant, tech billionaire and business titan, found himself covered in flour in his new kitchen, laughing as Oliver demonstrated the proper technique for tossing pizza dough in the air. The boy's instructions were precise and serious, his small face concentrated on the task at hand, with the same intensity Maxwell recognized from his own reflection. "Mom said the secret is in how you fold the edge," Oliver explained, demonstrating with his smaller portion of dough. "It has to be thick enough to hold the sauce, but not so thick that it gets doughy." Maxwell followed his instructions, finding an unexpected satisfaction in the tactile process. When their creations were finally in the oven, father and son sat at the kitchen island, drinking the chocolate milk Oliver had requested. "So," Maxwell said carefully, "I thought that after dinner we could test that rocket simulator in your room. Or, if you prefer, we could work on your science fair project. Your aunt mentioned it's due in a few weeks." "Actually," Oliver said, his voice taking on a hesitant quality, "I was wondering if we could maybe look at some pictures of you and Mom. I only have a few, and Aunt Sarah doesn't talk about her much because it makes her sad." The request caught Maxwell off guard. He had carefully curated his digital presence over the years, systematically removing personal elements, particularly after Eliza's death. But he remembered the wooden box in his luggage, brought from his penthouse, specifically because some part of him had anticipated this moment. "I have a few," he said. "Not many, but some good ones. We can look at them after dinner." Oliver smiled, relieved. "And maybe you could tell me stories about when you knew her." "I'd like that," Maxwell said, surprised to find that it was true. For years he had avoided speaking about Eliza, changed the subject whenever her name arose. The pain had been too acute, the loss too profound. Now, faced with her son, their son, he found himself wanting to resurrect those memories, to preserve them for Oliver's sake. As they sat later that evening on the living room sofa, the photo album open between them, Maxwell shared stories he hadn't allowed himself to remember in years. The weekend technology conference where they'd first met, arguing passionately about programming ethics. Their third date at a planetarium, where Eliza had impressed him with her knowledge of constellation mythology. The night she had stayed up with him, rewriting code until dawn, when his first major project seemed on the verge of failure. With each story, Oliver's eyes grew heavier, though he fought sleep determinedly, hungry for every detail about his mother and the father he was just beginning to know. When he finally dozed off, his head resting against Maxwell's arm, Maxwell sat still, afraid to disturb this fragile moment of connection. Carefully, he reached for his phone and opened the secure folder containing the information his investigator had gathered. New documents had been added. Medical records from a private facility in Switzerland, payments from an offshore account linked to Eliza, a lease agreement for a remote cottage in the Alps 3 months before Oliver's official birth date. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. What had Eliza been hiding? Why the elaborate measures to obscure Oliver's early months? And most troublingly, why had she kept their son a secret, even when her own health was failing? As Maxwell scrolled through the documents, Oliver stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent before settling again. Looking down at the boy's peaceful face, Maxwell made a decision. Whatever secrets lay in Eliza's past, whatever reasons she'd had for her choices, he would uncover them all. Not out of anger or a sense of betrayal, but because Oliver deserved to know his full history, and because Maxwell needed to understand what had driven the woman he loved to such extraordinary measures. What had she feared? Who had she been protecting their son from? With a gentle touch, Maxwell brushed Oliver's hair from his forehead, noting how the gesture felt simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. "I'll find the truths," he whispered, making a promise to both his sleeping son and the memory of the woman who had connected them. "Oh, and I'll make sure you're always safe." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of the Boston townhouse. Maxwell had been awake for hours, alternating between reviewing the latest findings from his investigator and watching Oliver sleep in the room across the hall. The boy slept curled on his side, one hand tucked under his cheek, in a gesture that reminded Maxwell painfully of Eliza. The investigation had yielded troubling new information overnight. Financial records showed that in the months before Oliver's birth, Eliza had liquidated nearly all of her personal investments and transferred the funds to Switzerland. There were records of consultations with high-level security firms, specialists in identity protection, and, most concerning of all, evidence that she had been in contact with federal authorities. Was she running from something? Someone? The question haunted Maxwell as he quietly prepared breakfast, following the instructions Sarah had left for Oliver's preferred morning meal: oatmeal with sliced bananas and a drizzle of honey. "You made breakfast?" Oliver's voice came from the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing the space-themed pajamas Maxwell had purchased for him. "I did," Maxwell confirmed, setting a bowl on the kitchen island. "I hope it's acceptable. I'm not much of a cook, as you discovered yesterday." Oliver climbed onto a stool and picked up his spoon. "It looks good." He took a cautious bite, then nodded approvingly. "You remember the cinnamon." The simple approval filled Maxwell with disproportionate satisfaction. "I pay attention to details," he said, pouring himself coffee. "It's part of my job." "What exactly do you do?" Oliver asked, genuinely curious. "I know you make computers, but Aunt Sarah says you're famous for something else too." Maxwell considered how to explain his work to an 8-year-old, even one as precocious as Oliver. "My company creates systems that help other machines think and learn," he said finally. "We develop artificial intelligence that's used in everything from medical research to space exploration." Oliver's eyes widened. "Like robots that can think for themselves?" "Sometimes," Maxwell acknowledged. "But more often it's invisible technology that helps people solve problems faster than they could alone." He paused, then added, "Your mother was instrumental in developing some of our early algorithms. She had a unique way of approaching complex problems." "Mom was smart," Oliver stated with certainty. "She could do the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen without making mistakes." Maxwell smiled at this concrete evidence of intelligence. "She was brilliant," he agreed, "and not just with puzzles. She understood people in a way I never did. She could predict how they would react, what they would need." His smile faded as he considered the implications of her secrecy regarding Oliver. What had she predicted about Maxwell's reaction to fatherhood that had made her keep such a monumental secret? "Are we still going to the Science Museum today?" Oliver asked, pulling Maxwell from his thoughts. "Absolutely," Maxwell confirmed. "I've arranged for a private tour of their aerospace exhibit. One of the curators is a former NASA engineer who's agreed to show us some items not normally on display." Oliver's excitement was palpable as he rushed to get dressed. Maxwell cleared the breakfast dishes, his mind returning to the investigation. He needed to accelerate the process, but discreetly. Whatever Eliza had been involved in, whatever had driven her to such elaborate security measures, might still pose a risk to Oliver. The Science Museum proved to be a resounding success. Oliver's enthusiasm was infectious as they explored exhibits on space exploration, quantum physics, and renewable energy. Maxwell found himself genuinely engaged, viewing the familiar scientific concepts through Oliver's fresh perspective. "This is a prototype of the ion propulsion system developed for deep space exploration," Dr. Harmon, the curator, explained as he unlocked a special display case. "It's still classified in some respects, but I've been authorized to show you the non-restricted components." It uses electrical charges to accelerate particles for thrust, right? Oliver asked, leaning in for a closer look. Dr. Harmon looked impressed. That's exactly right. How did you know that? I read about it, Oliver said matter-of-factly, in Frontiers of Space Technology. Dad has a copy in my room. Dad. The casual way Oliver used the term still sent a jolt through Maxwell, a mixture of pride and responsibility that he was still adjusting to. As they examined the propulsion system, Maxwell's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from his investigator. Urgent development. Call secure line immediately. Oliver, Maxwell said, keeping his voice even. Why don't you ask Dr. Harmon about the Mars rover replicas while I make a quick call? It's headquarters. Won't take long. Once, in a quiet corner of the exhibit hall, Maxwell activated the secure line protocol on his phone. What have you found? He asked without preamble. Sir, we've located records of a threat assessment conducted by a private security firm at Ms. Bennett's request 8 years ago, the investigator reported. The target of the assessment was an individual named Viktor Karev. Maxwell frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Who is he? Former intelligence operative turned corporate espionage specialist. He worked for Nextech Industries until their collapse following the cyber warfare scandal. Maxwell's blood ran cold. Nextech had been Ground Technology's most aggressive competitor in the early days. Their downfall had come after illegal surveillance techniques, and data theft had been exposed, activities that Maxwell's own security team had helped uncover. Karev blamed you personally for Nextech's destruction, the investigator continued. He lost millions and was nearly extradited to face charges in 3 countries. He disappeared off the grid 7 years ago, but there were rumors he had sworn vengeance against those responsible for his downfall, you being at the top of that list. The pieces were beginning to align in a terrifying pattern. And Eliza knew about this? She appears to have been investigating him independently. The security assessment included protocols for identity concealment and relocation strategies. Sir, there's more. We found records of her contacting the FBI's Witness Protection Division approximately 7 months before Oliver's birth. Maxwell gripped the phone tighter. You're saying she was hiding from Karev, that she hid our son to protect him from a potential threat? The evidence strongly suggests that, yes. And sir, there's been recent activity on accounts previously linked to Karev. He may be active again. The world seemed to tilt beneath Maxwell's feet as the implications crashed over him. If Karev was active and somehow discovered Oliver's existence, his connection to Maxwell, the boy, could be in danger. I want comprehensive security measures implemented immediately, Maxwell ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the fear clawing at his chest. Full protection detail for Oliver and Sarah, background checks on everyone at his school, monitoring of all communications, and I want Karev found. Sir, if he's been underground this long, finding him won't be... Use every resource, Maxwell cut him off. Whatever it costs, I want him located and neutralized as a threat. After ending the call, Maxwell stood motionless, processing this new reality. Across the exhibit hall, Oliver was animatedly discussing Mars rover design with Dr. Harmon, his small hands gesturing enthusiastically as he described something. Looking at him, this innocent child unaware of the shadows potentially gathering around him, Maxwell felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, unlike anything he'd experienced before. Eliza had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect their son, sacrificing her last years with Maxwell to keep Oliver safe. Now, that responsibility fell to him. Whatever it took, whatever resources were required, Maxwell would ensure that Oliver remained safe, that the threat Eliza had hidden him from never reached him. With newfound determination, Maxwell rejoined Oliver and Dr. Harmon, maintaining a casual demeanor while his mind raced through contingency plans and security protocols. By the time they left the museum, he had remotely authorized increased security measures for the townhouse and scheduled a meeting with his head of corporate security for the following morning. "That was the best day ever," Oliver declared as they drove home, his backpack filled with books and model kits from the museum gift shop. "Dr. Harmon said I asked better questions than most college students who visit. Do you think that's true?" "I wouldn't doubt it," Maxwell said, genuinely proud, despite his preoccupation with security concerns. "You have an exceptional mind, Oliver." "Like you and Mom," Oliver said, the statement both observation and question. "Yes," Maxwell agreed, glancing at the boy in the rearview mirror. "You've inherited the best of both of us, I think." Back at the townhouse, Maxwell implemented additional security measures under the guise of home automation upgrades. State-of-the-art surveillance systems, motion sensors, and reinforced entry points were disguised as smart home technology. Oliver, fascinated by the technical aspects, asked endless questions about how the systems worked, unaware of their true purpose. As evening approached, Sarah called to confirm her arrival time. Maxwell, now acutely conscious of security, arranged for his private car service to collect her from her sister's home, rather than having her take a taxi. "How was your weekend?" she asked when she arrived, studying Oliver's face for any signs of distress or unhappiness. "It was awesome," Oliver exclaimed before Maxwell could respond. "We made pizza and went to the science museum, and Dad showed me how to program the rocket simulator, and we looked at old pictures of Mom and talked about her, and Dad says we can do video calls every night when I go back home." Sarah looked taken aback by both the enthusiasm and the casual use of Dad. She turned to Maxwell with a questioning expression. "We had a good time," he confirmed, understating deliberately. "Oliver is welcome here anytime. In fact, I'd like to discuss a more formal arrangement for regular visits." "Can I show Aunt Sarah my room?" Oliver asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Of course," Maxwell agreed, watching as Oliver grabbed Sarah's hand and practically dragged her up the stairs, chattering about the telescope and the books and everything else that had made the weekend special. Alone momentarily, Maxwell checked his secure messages. No updates on Karev's whereabouts, but the security protocols were in place. Sarah and Oliver would have invisible protection, following them back to their home in Boston. It wasn't ideal. Maxwell would have preferred to keep Oliver directly under his protection, but it was the best compromise for now. When they returned downstairs, Oliver went to gather his belongings, leaving Maxwell and Sarah alone. "He seems happy," Sarah acknowledged, her initial wariness somewhat diminished. "I haven't seen him this animated in a long time." "I'd like him to stay that way," Maxwell said carefully. "Sarah, there's something we need to discuss. Something about Eliza's reasons for keeping Oliver's existence from me." Sarah's expression changed, a flash of something, fear, recognition, crossing her features before she composed herself. "What do you mean?" "I believe Eliza was protecting Oliver," Maxwell said, watching her reaction closely. "From a specific threat connected to my work." Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly. Confirmation enough. "How did you find out?" "I have resources," Maxwell said simply. "What I need to know is how much you know. Was Eliza in contact with someone named Viktor Karev?" Sarah paled visibly at the name. "Not in contact with him, no. She was hiding from him. We both were. He had made threats, explicit threats, after your company provided evidence that led to Nextech's collapse. He blamed you, but he also targeted those close to you. And yet you never thought to warn me about this?" Maxwell's voice held a dangerous edge. "Eliza handled it," Sarah said defensively. "She had connections in federal law enforcement. They helped her disappear, create new identities for herself and later for Oliver. We thought the threat had passed. Karev dropped off the radar years ago. He's resurfaced," Maxwell informed her bluntly. "And if he discovers Oliver's connection to me—" "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "What do we do?" "For now, you continue as normal, but with enhanced security that I've arranged. Oliver doesn't need to know anything that would frighten him. Meanwhile, I'll handle Karev." "Handle him how?" Sarah asked, a note of alarm in her voice. Maxwell's expression hardened. "By eliminating the threat he poses permanently." Before Sarah could respond, Oliver returned with his suitcase. "I'm ready," he announced, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "But I left some stuff here too, for next time." "That was good thinking," Maxwell said, his voice softening immediately. "This will always be your home too, Oliver, whenever you want to come back." The farewell was emotional, particularly for Oliver, who clung to Maxwell in a tight hug before reluctantly following Sarah to the waiting car. Maxwell stood in the doorway until the vehicle disappeared from sight, then closed the door and activated the comprehensive security system. In his home office, he opened a secure communication channel to his head of corporate security. "I need a team assembled," he instructed. "Former intelligence, counterterrorism specialists, the best available. Budget is no object." "What's the target, sir?" came the professional response. Maxwell pulled up the file his investigator had compiled on Viktor Karev, studying the grainy photograph of the man who threatened everything he had just discovered was truly important in his life. "His name is Viktor Karev," Maxwell said, his voice cold with determination, "and he's a direct threat to my son." The next 2 weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated balance of normalcy and heightened vigilance. On the surface, Maxwell established a routine that included daily video calls with Oliver, weekend visits facilitated by his private jet, and increasingly involved participation in Oliver's science fair project. Behind this veneer of ordinary father-son bonding, however, an invisible net of security tightened around both Oliver and Sarah. Maxwell's team had identified and neutralized 3 surveillance attempts on Oliver's school, though whether they were connected to Karev remained unclear. The security detail assigned to shadow Oliver reported nothing overtly suspicious, but Maxwell took no chances, rotating personnel frequently and implementing counter-surveillance measures that would make a foreign intelligence agency proud. Despite the best efforts of his investigators, Karev himself remained elusive, a ghost moving through digital and physical spaces with the skill of someone who had spent years evading detection. The fragments they did uncover painted a disturbing picture. Financial transactions linked to known arms dealers, communications with former associates from the darkest corners of the intelligence community, and a pattern of movement that seemed to be steadily closing in on Boston. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Maxwell sat in his temporary Boston office, listening to Oliver's excited chatter about his day at school, while simultaneously reviewing security reports on a separate screen. "Ms. Peterson said my science project might qualify for the regional competition if it works like I designed it," Oliver was saying, his face animated on the video call. "The solar-powered water filtration system uses some of the same principles as your company's desalination technology, right?" "Similar concepts, yes," Maxwell agreed, pride momentarily overriding his security concerns. "Your implementation is quite innovative, especially for your age level. I'm impressed with how you've adapted the membrane technology to work with limited power input." Oliver beamed at the praise. "I'm going to work on the prototype tonight. Aunt Sarah bought all the materials from the list you sent." Maxwell made a mental note to thank Sarah for her continued support, despite the strange circumstances they all found themselves in. She had adapted remarkably well to the increased security presence in their lives, accepting it as necessary even as she maintained a sense of normalcy for Oliver. "I look forward to seeing your progress," Maxwell said, glancing at a notification that had just appeared on his secondary screen. A potential lead on Karev's whereabouts had emerged, a facial recognition match from a surveillance camera in Cambridge, less than 10 miles from Oliver's school. We can discuss any adjustments during our call tomorrow. After ending the conversation with Oliver, Maxwell immediately contacted his security team. I want the Cambridge footage verified immediately, he instructed. Full spectrum analysis, gait recognition, everything. If it's him, I want to know his current location within the hour. While waiting for confirmation, Maxwell reviewed the contingency plans he had developed. If Karev was indeed closing in, it might become necessary to move Oliver and Sarah to a more secure location, perhaps the private island Maxwell owned in the Caribbean, or the fortified compound in New Zealand that he had purchased as a potential headquarters site. The challenge would be convincing Sarah without revealing the full extent of the threat, something he had deliberately downplayed to avoid causing her undue stress. His secure phone line rang, James calling from corporate headquarters. The board is growing restless, his CFO reported without preamble. The quarterly projections are down 7%, and the Rivera acquisition is stalling without your direct involvement. They're calling for an emergency meeting tomorrow. Maxwell frowned. Schedule it for 10 a.m. their time. I'll participate virtually. Max, James said, his voice dropping to a more personal tone, is everything all right? This situation with your son, is there something more going on? Maxwell hesitated. James was not only his CFO, but the closest thing he had to a friend. Still, the fewer people who knew about Karev, the better. It's complicated, he finally said. Family matters require my attention here for the foreseeable future. The board is threatening to invoke the succession clause, James warned. If you're absent from headquarters for more than 30 consecutive days without medical justification, they can appoint an interim CEO. Maxwell's expression hardened. Let them try. I still control 53% of voting shares. True, but they can make things difficult, tie up resources you might need, delay key decisions. Just consider making an appearance in person soon. Even a day or two would settle them down. After ending the call, Maxwell stood at the window of his office, looking out at the Boston skyline as evening descended. The corporate power struggles that had once consumed his every waking hour now seemed trivial compared to the safety of his son. Yet he couldn't simply abandon the company he had built from nothing, not only because it represented his life's work, but because its resources were essential to protecting Oliver. His phone chimed with an encrypted message. Facial match confirmed with 98.7% certainty. Subject spotted entering private residence in Cambridge 93 minutes ago. Surveillance team in position, awaiting orders. Maxwell's pulse quickened. This was the closest they had come to locating Karev. If they could apprehend him now, the threat to Oliver would be eliminated before it fully materialized. He was composing his response when another alert came through. This one from the security detail assigned to Oliver. Subject departed residence with guardian for unscheduled trip to local library, maintaining discreet distance. The coincidence sent a spike of alarm through Maxwell. An unscheduled trip on the same evening Karev was confirmed to be in Cambridge. It was too close for comfort. Maintain visual contact at all times, he instructed the security team. Be prepared to intervene immediately if approach is attempted. Send nearest available team members to reinforce. Then to the surveillance team monitoring Karev. Do not engage. Continue observation only. Priority is determining his intentions and contacts. Maxwell grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, summoning his driver as he moved. He wouldn't take chances with Oliver's safety, not when Karev was potentially so close. The local library was a modern building with large windows and multiple entrances, a security nightmare. Maxwell instructed his driver to park where they could observe the main entrance, while he remotely accessed the feeds from his security team. Oliver and Sarah were visible on one camera, sitting at a table in the children's section. Oliver appeared to be taking notes from a large reference book, likely additional research for his science project. Sarah sat beside him, occasionally helping him locate information. The normalcy of the scene, a boy working on his homework, his aunt providing guidance, contrasted sharply with the tension Maxwell felt watching them. Somewhere, potentially in this very building, was a man who might wish them harm simply because of their connection to him. Maxwell was considering entering the library himself when a new alert came through. Subject Karev on the move, heading east on Lexington Avenue, away from library location. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by determination. This might be their best opportunity to neutralize the threat. Maintain surveillance on Karev, he instructed. I want real-time updates on his destination. For the next hour, Maxwell remained outside the library, divided between monitoring Oliver's safety and tracking Karev's movements across Cambridge. When Sarah and Oliver finally emerged, Maxwell sank lower in his seat, not wanting to explain his unexpected presence. As they walked to Sarah's car, Maxwell noticed Oliver clutching a large poster board, presumably for his science fair display. The sight of his son, engaged in such a normal, wholesome activity while under threat from an unseen enemy, strengthened Maxwell's resolve. Whatever it took, he would ensure Oliver could continue his life without fear. Once Sarah's car had departed with its security escort, following at a discreet distance, Maxwell directed his driver to the location where Karev had last been seen. The surveillance team reported that the former operative had entered a nondescript apartment building 20 minutes earlier and had not re-emerged. I want the building's schematics, tenant information, and all potential escape routes mapped, Maxwell instructed as they drove. No one approaches him directly until we've established containment protocols. The apartment building turned out to be an unremarkable 5-story structure with security that would have been considered average for the neighborhood, but was laughably inadequate against someone with Maxwell's resources. Within minutes, his team had accessed the building's security system, identified the apartment Karev had entered, and established surveillance on all exits. Thermal imaging shows one heat signature in the target apartment, reported the security team leader. Subject appears to be seated at a desk or table. Maxwell considered his options. Direct confrontation was risky. Karev was ex-intelligence with a reportedly lethal skill set, but allowing him to remain free, potentially planning some action against Oliver, was unacceptable. I want to see him, Maxwell decided. Access the building's camera system and get me visual confirmation. After several tense minutes, his tablet displayed a grainy image from a hallway camera. The figure moving down the corridor was indeed Viktor Karev, older than in his file photos, with graying hair and a slight limp, but unmistakably the same man. He carried a grocery bag in one hand and what appeared to be a laptop case in the other. He's living there, Maxwell realized aloud. This isn't a temporary safe house. He's established a residence. This changed the calculus significantly. If Karev had settled in Cambridge, it suggested a long-term operation rather than a quick strike. It might also indicate that he was unaware of Oliver's existence or connection to Maxwell. Otherwise, why establish a base so close to his potential target? Continue surveillance, Maxwell instructed. I want to know his patterns, his contacts, his communications, everything, but no direct engagement yet. Back at his temporary headquarters, Maxwell reviewed all the information they had gathered on Karev over the previous weeks. Something wasn't adding up. If Karev was indeed seeking revenge, his actions so far had been surprisingly indirect. No attempts to approach Oliver or Sarah had been detected. No surveillance of Maxwell's Boston residence had been identified. Was it possible they were missing something? Maxwell pulled up the original security assessment Eliza had commissioned 8 years ago. The document was thorough, detailing Karev's background, known associates, and psychological profile. One section caught Maxwell's attention: an analysis of Karev's methods. Subject typically employs indirect approach when seeking leverage against targets. preference for attacking through financial or reputational vulnerabilities rather than physical harm. History suggests subject will identify what target values most and systematically dismantle it. Maxwell frowned, considering the implications. If Karev's typical method wasn't direct violence, but rather systematic destruction of what his target valued most, and if he somehow discovered Maxwell's connection to Oliver, a new alert interrupted his thoughts. A priority message from his corporate security team. Unauthorized access detected in company mainframe. Intrusion originated from Cambridge IP address. Data breach confirmed in executive files. Maxwell's blood ran cold. Karev wasn't planning a physical attack. He was gathering information, and he had just accessed Maxwell's corporate files, which likely contained references to his recent scheduling changes, travel to Boston, perhaps even mentions of Oliver in personal communications. With grim certainty, Maxwell realized that the indirect surveillance attempts at Oliver's school hadn't been to establish the boy's routines. They had been to confirm his identity, to verify the connection that Karev must have suspected. Lock down all systems, Maxwell ordered his corporate security team. Complete communication blackout, and get me everything that was accessed during the breach. To his Boston security team, immediate extraction protocol for both primary subjects. Take them to secure location Alpha. No explanations, maximum urgency. Maxwell grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He needed to reach Oliver and Sarah before Karev made his move, whatever form that might take. As he rushed to his car, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, a message that stopped him in his tracks. She hid him well, your son. Eliza was always clever, but not clever enough in the end. How much is he worth to you, I wonder? Everything, I suspect. We should discuss terms. You have 1 hour. The message included an image, a photograph taken within the last hour of Oliver in the library, intensely focused on his science project research, completely unaware of the lens capturing his image. Maxwell's hand tightened around his phone, rage and fear warring within him. Karev had made his move, confirming his knowledge of Oliver and his intention to use the boy as leverage. But in doing so, he had made a critical mistake. He had revealed himself, and Maxwell Grant had never been more dangerous than when protecting what was his. 6 months later, Maxwell stood at the edge of his expansive backyard, watching as Oliver made final adjustments to the rocket they had built together. The New Hampshire estate, with its 20 acres of private land and state-of-the-art security perimeter, had become their home following the confrontation with Karev. Today, with spring warming the air and wildflowers dotting the landscape, the property felt less like a fortress and more like the family home it had become. Trajectory calculations complete, Oliver announced, squinting at the small tablet displaying his computations. Wind speed is within acceptable parameters. We're ready for launch, Dad. Maxwell smiled at the confidence in his son's voice. In the months since Oliver had come to live with him permanently, the boy had flourished, excelling in his new school, developing friendships, and growing increasingly comfortable with his place in Maxwell's life. Final checklist, Maxwell prompted, part of their established routine for these weekend rocket launches. Oliver went through each item methodically, his attention to detail reminiscent of both his parents. Fuel system secure, electronics functioning, recovery parachute packed properly, launch site clear of obstructions. He looked up at Maxwell with excited eyes. We'll go for launch. As they retreated to a safe distance, Maxwell thought back to the night that had changed everything, the night he had faced Viktor Karev. The confrontation had not played out as either man had expected. When Maxwell had arrived at the designated meeting location, a deserted waterfront warehouse, he had come neither with security forces nor with the ransom Karev had demanded. Instead, he had brought the truth. You've been operating on incomplete information, Maxwell had told the armed man waiting in the shadows. Eliza wasn't just hiding my son from me, she was hiding him from everyone, including you. But not for the reasons you think. Karev had kept his weapon trained on Maxwell, skepticism evident in his scarred face. Enlighten me then. Maxwell had produced a file. The complete investigation his team had uncovered, including the parts he had initially missed. Eliza wasn't working against you, Karev. She was trying to protect you too. The evidence had been irrefutable. Eliza had discovered that the cyber warfare techniques that had ultimately destroyed Nextech and implicated Karev had been planted by a third party, a government intelligence agency using both companies as pawns in a larger game. Karev had been set up as the fall guy, just as Maxwell had been manipulated into providing the evidence against him. She was building a case to exonerate you, Maxwell had explained. But when she discovered she was pregnant, she realized the danger extended to our child. The same people who framed you wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose their operation, including her and an innocent baby. Karev's expression had shifted as he reviewed the documents, recognition dawning in his eyes. The Swiss accounts, the security protocols. She was gathering evidence while protecting our son, Maxwell had confirmed. When her illness accelerated, she had to make a choice: continue her investigation or ensure Oliver's safety. She chose our son. What had followed was an uneasy alliance between former enemies, united by the revelation of a common adversary and by Eliza's posthumous influence. Karev, with his intelligence background, had proven invaluable in identifying and eventually exposing the governmental faction that had manipulated them both. Maxwell, with his resources and technological expertise, had provided the platform to bring the evidence to light. The joint operation had culminated 3 months ago with a carefully orchestrated data release that had sent shockwaves through intelligence communities worldwide and led to high-profile resignations and criminal investigations. Karev, his name cleared, had disappeared once more, this time with substantial resources provided by Maxwell as both compensation and acknowledgement of their unusual partnership. 3, 2, 1, launch! Oliver's countdown pulled Maxwell back to the present moment. The rocket shot skyward with a satisfying whoosh, its trajectory straight and true against the clear blue sky. Perfect launch! Oliver exclaimed, jumping with excitement. The stabilization modifications worked exactly like we calculated. Maxwell put his arm around his son's shoulders, feeling the now familiar surge of love and protectiveness. Excellent work. Your mother would be incredibly proud of your engineering skills. Oliver leaned into the embrace, comfortable now with these references to Eliza. Do you think she would like our new home? She would love it, Maxwell assured him, knowing it was true. The estate, while impressive, lacked the cold minimalism of his former penthouse. Instead, it was filled with warmth, books, musical instruments, art, and photographs that celebrated their growing family history. Sarah was a regular visitor, having relocated to a comfortable house nearby at Maxwell's insistence. Their initial wariness had evolved into mutual respect and eventually genuine friendship, bonded by their shared love for Oliver and for Eliza's memory. The corporate empire still demanded Maxwell's attention, but on new terms. He had restructured Grant Technologies, delegating day-to-day operations to allow for a balanced life that prioritized his role as a father. The board had initially resisted, until Maxwell had demonstrated that his new approach, more collaborative, more innovative, more human, was actually improving both performance and company culture. As they tracked the rocket's descent, Maxwell reflected on how completely his life had transformed in less than a year. The man who had once measured success in billions and technological breakthroughs now found his greatest achievements in a child's smile, in weekend rocket launches, in family dinners where Oliver recounted his day's adventures. The parachute deployed perfectly, bringing the rocket down in a gentle arc toward the open field. "Dad, look, it's going to land right in the designated recovery zone," Oliver pointed triumphantly. "Exceptional calculations," Maxwell praised, genuine pride in his voice. "You're a natural engineer." As they walked together to retrieve the rocket, Oliver's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Mom's research, the stuff you told me about how she was trying to help people who were wrongly accused." Maxwell had shared an age-appropriate version of Eliza's efforts to clear Karev, omitting the more dangerous elements but honoring her commitment to justice. "What about it?" "I want to do something like that someday," Oliver said seriously. "Build technology that helps protect people and finds the truth, like Mom did with her investigations, and like you do with your AI systems." Maxwell felt his heart swell with emotion. "That's a worthy goal, and you already have a head start with your exceptional mind. We could work on it together," Oliver suggested, his eyes bright with possibility. "I have some ideas for my next science project. A system that analyzes data to detect inconsistencies that humans might miss." "I'd be honored to collaborate," Maxwell said, amazed yet again by this remarkable child who combined Eliza's compassion with his own analytical thinking. They reached the rocket, and Oliver carefully inspected it for damage, finding none. "Perfect recovery. Mission complete," he declared with satisfaction. As they walked back toward the house where lunch awaited them, Maxwell reflected on the strange and winding path that had led him here. The grief of losing Eliza would never fully disappear, but it had been transformed by the gift she had left behind, not just their son, but a second chance at living a life of true meaning and connection. The cemetery visit that had begun this journey seemed like a lifetime ago. The solitary figure, moving among cold granite stones, bore little resemblance to the man Maxwell had become, a father who had learned that true legacy isn't measured in corporate achievements or financial empires, but in the love we share and the lives we touch. "Race you to the house?" Oliver challenged with a grin. "You're on," Maxwell agreed, deliberately slowing his pace to let his son surge ahead, Oliver's laughter trailing behind him like a banner of joy against the spring sky. Later that evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, Maxwell sat in his study reviewing the latest updates from his legal team. The trust funds he had established for Oliver's future were secure, the joint custody arrangement with Sarah was working smoothly, and the foundation he had created in Eliza's name to help wrongfully accused individuals was gaining international recognition. He opened his desk drawer and removed the small wooden box containing his keepsakes of Eliza. To the photographs and mementos, he had added a new item, a letter Oliver had written to his mother on her birthday, sharing his experiences and dreams in the innocent, heartfelt words of a child. Maxwell had taken Oliver to her grave that day, standing back to give him privacy as the boy had carefully placed flowers and told his mother about his new life. Beside the box lay a framed photograph, the three of them together, a digital composite Maxwell had commissioned showing what might have been. It was both painful and comforting, a glimpse of an alternate reality where they had been a family from the beginning. Yet the reality they had now, unconventional as it was, held its own unique beauty. Out of loss and secrets, out of danger and revelation, they had forged something precious, a family bound not just by blood, but by choice, by forgiveness, and by love that transcended even death. Maxwell closed the wooden box gently and rose to check on Oliver one last time before retiring. The boy slept peacefully, his breathing deep and regular, one arm wrapped around the model rocket they had recovered earlier. Maxwell adjusted the blanket, brushed the hair from Oliver's forehead in what had become a nightly ritual, and whispered the words that had once been so foreign but now felt as natural as breathing. "Good night, son. I love you." When Natty, in the quiet of the room, Maxwell could almost feel Eliza's presence, not as a ghost of the past, but as a living force in the child they had created together. In Oliver's compassionate heart, in his brilliant mind, in his curious spirit, Eliza lived on. And in becoming the father she had always believed he could be, Maxwell had finally found his way home. Thank you so much for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Maxwell and Oliver's story resonated with you most? And if you have suggestions for future stories you'd like to hear, I'm always looking for inspiration. Remember, sometimes the greatest treasures in life come to us in unexpected ways, just when we need them most.